Hey, it's Chris. Let's talk a little bit about Apple's new Studio display. Now, this is one thing that they didn't send me. They usually send me the iPads, they usually send me the iPhones. Got the new Apple Watch from them to review. The Mac team hasn't been sending me stuff very frequently for the last couple years to check out. So I haven't actually gone hands on with this yet, but I desperately would like to. Number one, because I like Apple products and I'm just curious, I'm interested. Number two, if you take away the price, it seems really appealing to have a bunch of stuff conveniently packaged together in a minimalistic, good looking product, right? It's been a little bit controversial. I'm looking at Dan Seiferd's thread here on Twitter, and this is what he says. There's been a lot of fair criticism about the Studio Display's value per dollar, but I gotta say, there's something appealing about a high-end display that includes, number one, a good webcam, number two, a good mic, number three, good speakers, all in one package that I can just plug into my laptop. Basically, the point being, you can just plop this down on your desk, have something that not only looks good, but gets rid of a bunch of clutter potentially on your desk. Don't have to plug in separate speakers, for instance. Don't have to plug in a separate webcam potentially, although you might want to. And honestly, one of the criticisms, we're gonna get to the price and the value discussion in a second, but one of the criticisms already is like the webcam could be better. And I've always been a little bit puzzled why Apple includes the webcams that they do. It's always like just passable. It's never like, wow, that's amazing quality in a webcam, which I sort of would expect from Apple, who makes incredible cameras for the backs of iPhones. So the camera that they did include, they call it Sensational. It's a 12 megapixel ultra wide camera with center stage. You know that I like center stage. I'm a fan of it. On the iPad in particular, it's like my go-to thing for whenever I'm doing a meeting. But as Dan points out in his Twitter thread, it goes on, he says, I think the era of my try hard mirrorless camera as a webcam setup is coming to an end. And if you're listening to the audio version of this podcast, I'm showing an Elgato setup with dual monitors, speakers everywhere, got lights, and you've got the stand with your DSLR pointing at you, which would be the ultimate webcam experience, right? So Dan's like, maybe that's coming to an end, this kind of crazy thing. I think you always have this battle for your desk setup that it needs to be crazy and complicated and just have as much stuff packed in as possible versus you got these minimalists out there and they want to get rid of all the clutter and just have the bare minimum. And this display really fits in with that mentality and attitude. And whatever you do, whether you do the simplistic, everything in one product sort of approach, or you prefer the really complicated sort of Elgato looking setup, there's always gonna be trade-offs. And I want people to keep that in mind as they're either praising or destroying the good or bad about this particular display. So Christian Selig also pointed out, here's a quick visualization for you, 4K versus 5K resolution. This is also on Twitter if you're listening. It might not seem like a lot, but it's a substantial difference considering it's an increase in both dimensions. Again, almost double the overall pixels. And of course, he's overlaid 4K and 5K into the graphic here. And yeah, there's a good amount of extra pixels packed in. And some people are gonna be like, a 4K display is so much cheaper. This new Studio display is 5K. There's not a lot of 5Ks out there on the market. But you know what? This extra resolution, it does come in handy, not just visually. When you're looking at stuff to make it, crisper, pop a little bit more, that's nice. But, practically, whenever I take a screenshot and insert it into a video to show people, when I do that on my Mac display, this is just an example, I get so much more usability in terms of how much I can zoom because there's so much more information packed in that screenshot versus when I do a screenshot on like one of my LG monitors. That's just a 4K display. I can't really zoom in and you really start to see those images fall apart. So, that's just an example. The 5K does matter in professional circumstances, aside from just looking good. One of the arguments that I was following on Twitter was happening on the day that this launched, was happening between Jonathan Morrison, who was all about the monitor, and then Snazzy Q, Quinn Nelson. But Jonathan had this tweet, last thought on the Studio display before I dive into the coverage. Haven't seen this level of cynicism since the iPhone XR, and it's disheartening. It's not perfect. The power cable's dumb. We could have loved And the power cable, what he's talking about there is it doesn't unplug from the back. You know, Apple just came out with the new iMac, and it has a really nice power cable that easily disconnects. Well, on this new Studio Display, it doesn't disconnect. You need some crazy thing from the Apple Store to disconnect it, unless you actually yank it out like Linus did, which you're not supposed to. Would have loved 1000 nits and 120 hertz, but it's an incredible display in terms of color, brightness, and resolution. And actually, Jaime Rivera, who doesn't always live in the Apple world, doesn't always default to liking Apple stuff, which is good. You know, we need critics of stuff to help things improve. He commented under Jonathan Sweetney, said, "Thank you, it's a good display. Sure, it's a bit pricey, but I can't deny how much I'd be willing to pay an extra $300 for any of my 3 LG displays to be made of aluminum and to have better speakers. It's not like if anything else in that price range is much better." And here we're getting into, you know, people are trying to say, is it a good value for the price? And I think it's important to point out, you just have 2 different mentalities kind of approaching a lot of Apple gear, and not just this Studio Display. Some people are just only about the money, right? Give me the minimum viable, passable thing for the cheapest price. And other people are like, no, you know what? I do want to spend a little bit more. I'll consider this like an affordable luxury, right? Because it's not like an actual luxury most of the time with Apple stuff. The gold Apple Watch was like a crazy luxury, but most Apple stuff kind of fits into the affordable luxury thing because how many people own iPhones, right? But for instance, here's Tim Blair who's saying a Samsung Odyssey G9 costs $400 less, has 1000 nit brightness, ultra wide OLED panel with 240 hertz refresh rate, and a 98 plus color accuracy. And then it doesn't have the speaker, so he says buy a $100 speaker set that's going to sound better than the Studio Display anyways to go with it. And then he ends by saying, congrats, you've now saved $300 and you doubled your value. And this person is the example of somebody who's, and there's nothing wrong with this view, right? Everyone do what they want to do, who's like, no, saving $300 matters more to me than the convenience or the look or anything else. But Jonathan pops back and he's like, no, that doesn't double my value because that's only a 1440p monitor. Resolution only goes wide. Ha. It's a killer option, no doubt, but 2 different things. So the question comes up, like, what are the best alternatives then? If for whatever reason, you're not interested in the Studio Display. Well, it's the things that were already there. One of those is the LG Ultrafine 5K, which is going to return as an alternative here. Now I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, does that look better than Apple's Studio Display? No, it doesn't. Honestly, no, it doesn't. Clearly, it doesn't have as many features as the Studio Display. It's just a 5K monitor, basically. And actually, it was developed in combination with Apple. LG and Apple work together. It does have Thunderbolt connectivity. And as this article puts it, ideal 5120 by 2880 resolution for Retina scaling on a Mac. And that's what's made it a go-to option for a lot of Mac users over the last several years. There's a Mac Rumors article that says the Apple Studio Display reviews are kind of saying it's a confusing miss. And I can't tell you how many confusing misses I've seen Apple sell a whole lot of. I'll give you one example. A lot of people just don't understand the new cheaper budget iPhone SE. It's got the guts of the latest iPhones, but it's paired with hardware that's older, right? And it doesn't have as many bells and whistles. And people are like, who would buy this? And guess what? It sells like hotcakes every time it comes out because some people want it. So switching back to the critiques of this new Studio Display, you know, somebody from Gizmodo said, on the top are vent holes for passive cooling. The rear panel got warm during my testing, but never reached concerning temps. Like those on the Mac Studio, the Studio Display's rubber pads failed to keep the monitor planted to my wooden desk. It slid around as I inserted or disconnected cables from the rear I/O. Does that sound like a huge thing to me? Because I've got 2 monitors on my desk right now from LG, they're Ergo monitors, and those things are moving all over the place all the time. And, you know, sometimes I'm like, well, that's annoying, but I kind of expect a monitor to do that. CNBC was like, the picture quality on the Studio Display is good, but it's not gonna blow you away. I like that the text is nice and sharp, thanks to the extra pixels, so people who read on the computer for hours might want to consider it. And while it might seem expensive, it's a lot less than the Pro Display XDR Apple also sells, which costs $5,000 before you add the $1,000 stand. So CNBC is like, it's good, but I don't know, I wanted something even better. What kind of, you know? Now, Mr. Patel from The Verge says the real issue is that for $1,600, that's a lot of money, and here it's buying you panel tech that is woefully behind the curve. Compared to Apple's other displays across the Mac, iPhone, and iPad lineup, the Studio Display is actually most notable for the things it doesn't have. So one of those things is that it's SDR, not HDR. So Apple sells a professional HDR display for a lot more money that regular people aren't gonna buy. This is another thing, people are like, why would they make that? They make it for a niche, right? Of people that need it to exist. So he's pointing out that it seems to have ancient backlight tech and that it also only features a 60 hertz refresh rate. But if we're honest, a lot of people aren't doing serious gaming on an Apple machine. They're doing like serious work, and you're not sitting there scrolling around like you are on a phone or an iPad potentially. You know, the iPad Pro with that 120 hertz, you got the Apple Pencil, and you need that low latency. You know, it makes a difference if you're doing some pro stuff. People went on and they said, you know, hey, it's too bad that we lack true blacks on the Studio Display because it's LCD, it's not OLED. I'm not gonna argue with that. I love my OLED TVs, I love my OLED devices, but at the same time, one of the main arguments against the Studio Display seems to be, but I want something cheaper. So are you gonna find an OLED screen for cheaper? Oh, it doesn't have true blacks. Well, OLED's better, but show me the cheaper OLED option that's gonna look better and have true blacks. The Verge goes on to say, you know, look, the mic and the speakers sound great, really, really great. You can adjust the 3-mic array to do voice isolation or not in Control Center, and you'll sound as good or better on calls as any conference mics I've ever heard. To have this stuff built in and not have the clutter all around and have it sound good, like even The Verge is saying, this stuff is cool, it matters, right? But here comes another nitpick, and that is that the spatial audio seems like a gimmick. But let's be honest, whatever your view on the spatial audio is, that it's a gimmick or it's amazing, you're probably not gonna be encountering anything on a day-to-day basis where you really need to rely on it anyways, whether it's great or not. One thing that I find really cool is the nano texture glass option though. Now this is like a love it or hate it thing. The first time I experienced it, it was like, this is really cool because I had a window right here and my desk was here, window here, really bright, got reflections all the time, and the nano texture was so helpful. And I fell in love with it at that point. Now, that means if you do get it, it's gonna cost you more, and it's not as easy to clean as if you just get the anti-reflective coating. So, know the room where you're gonna place this if you are going to get it is probably a good rule. That said, it does a really good job in my experience of getting rid of glare. In fact, what home office doesn't have a window around it these days? Probably most or all, right? And it's really hard to position your setup in a way that the reflections don't get you at some point during the day. Usually for me, it's in the mornings, and it comes in now from this side because of where I've got things set up. And I just know at like 9 in the morning during a certain time of the year, it's just gonna ruin my experience. And this would go a long way towards fixing that. Hey, thanks for stopping by. This was actually just a clip, but I'm gonna link up the full content down in the description, along with a link to our main channel and the Daily Tech podcast. If you're into Apple stuff, if you just wanna hang out, that will improve your week, guaranteed. Comes out on Fridays. Also, I'm gonna link up Jasper.ai. It's my favorite artificial intelligence writing assistant. I rely on it all the time. It's gonna blow your mind with how much time it'll save you. I really think it'll make your life better. Last but not least, if you like the vibe of this video and you wanna bring a big smile to my face, then why not hit that subscribe button?